Welcome back to another episode of Black Woman Be Well, and welcome to our third installment of our PCOS series. If you haven't already, you can check out the first two episodes. The first one was so good. We had Dr. Brittany Fowler on the line talking to us about what PCOS is from a medical definition. We had a great conversation about advocacy and advocating for yourself and having the right kind of conversations with your doctor. Episode 2, we were joined by my best friend, Jessica Vazan, and my best sister, Claudine Tomlinson-Burney. And we had a great conversation about our PCOS story, our experiences with being diagnosed and going through the symptoms and how we dealt with it medically. And then we had a really great segue conversation about birth control. So go back and check those two episodes if you can. And if you're joining us for the first time now, that's totally fine. We are joined back again with Jessica Vazan and my sister, Claudine Tomlinson-Burney, and with the great and fabulous Dr.Sheila Davis.
Hello.
So let me just introduce her formally, and she is very heavily credentialed, but she's also a good friend. So she has a education doctorate in counseling psychology. She's also a licensed mental health counselor, a national certified counselor, and a distanced credentialed counselor, which I'd never heard about that before, but apparently you can.
I can do online counseling,
which is amazing.
Right. Right.
But other than that, she's also a really good friend, and so she's going to bring in her expertise on this episode, but also just like have a great conversation with us.
Right.
I also want to give a special shout out to my wonderful producer, Shania. She's in the house, and she's amazing, and I love her. So thank you. All right, so let's talk about PCOS. This time, let's talk about PCOS, but let's focus on how it changed our bodies. And a lot of people that, for those that are learning about this for the first time, you might not have even known, maybe you've noticed your body might have changed or things have happened and you didn't even realize it might have been connected to this, this syndrome. So one of the things that I remember very strongly in my PCOS story was when I started feeling facial hair. I was like a junior in high school, and I was in biology class. I'll never forget it. And I was just rubbing my face, and I'm like, what are these? What are these things dangling?
Stubbles.
And honestly, from that day on, one of my new tics was sitting in class, pulling my hair. And it's like gross, because when you think about being feminine and being a woman, that's like the worst thing you can imagine experiencing as your body is changing. And it only got worse. So it got thicker and it spread across like all of the bottom of my chin. And if anyone's listening, you can actually Google PCOS and facial hair, or even PCOS and acne. That's another symptom. I had horrible acne, and most women have the same area on their face where they experience facial hair, ingrown hair, or severe acne. And it bothered the heck out of me, like seriously affected me. And really questioned it, like I questioned if I was actually beautiful or not. I tried to cover it with makeup, did not work. Because they just have cakey acne or cakey ingrown hair.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things that I really remember from my body changing with this thing, and I didn't know I had it at the time. I just thought something was wrong with me, So.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to chime in just to state, this is Claudine. My experience, I can relate to the facial hairs because there are areas on my face where I have facial hair, even with my chin, under my chin area. So I'll make a note to have to like take care of that. And I usually, when I get my nails done, I'll usually get my eyebrows waxed, of course. Every now and then the lady will ask, you want to get your chin done, or you want to get, no, I'm sorry, I take care of it.
My feelings so bad, like, no, I just shaved it. Right. No, you need a wax.
To the point where the lady was
I didn't know that.
This lady actually said to me, and I quote, "You look like men."
Oh my God.
That's what she said to me. I was like, okay, then, I think we might go ahead and get that done right quick. And you want to get the chin area too, under the nose, okay, yeah. I was so embarrassed. So let me go home. let me go home to my husband.
Right.
I just came here from my feet
Right.
and eyebrows.
And you end
know
up
what?
with everything
I had no
else.
idea those 3 words were so powerful.
Right.
You look like
a
4
man.
words like
You
that.
look like man. Okay, all right. So that was not my goal. So yeah, go ahead and take care of that.
But that's part of it, isn't it? Where you have to deal with other people's, opinion about
yes,
you.
that's part of it too.
It is.
And it does affect how you feel about yourself. And yes, we always know to be confident. But there are times where you're just like, man, I'm not feeling too attractive today, or I'm feeling bloated, or whatever the case may be. Your moods change.
Yep.
I was always told I was moody growing up.
That's another podcast episode.
Oh,
y'all,
boy.
when she's not in the room.
It might
Oh, my
be
goodness.
In this one, though. That's very normal.
I've been told that. So yeah, your moods tend to change, and I didn't know what all of this was when I was a teenager. I was just told that you have a hormonal imbalance. So it wasn't until when I became an adult in my mid-30s when I had a doctor actually diagnose me with what is known as PCOS. Okay, let's do some research. What in the world is this stuff? So thank you, my husband. He's very supportive, but there are a lot of drawbacks having this. So I've just learned to deal with it as the years rolled on. And, I just, having a support system, at least for me, I think helps. And that's pretty much my experience. But growing up as an impressionable person, young teenager, 20-something, it was the pits. I mean, I made sure. There was even one time when I got a facial for the first time, and it was at a nail salon. And to be honest with you, I didn't know what I was doing, and I didn't even know what I was allergic to, wasn't allergic to. Apparently, I was allergic to something that they use, because 2 days later, I had nothing but bumps all over my face. And I told myself, okay, well, maybe facials are not the thing, not knowing. I didn't even do any research or anything, so that's my bad. But I don't feel that way anymore about getting facials done. But I was just trying many things as a youngster.
And then that one experience
kind of turned me off, and I was like, well, maybe this
Yeah.
isn't the way to go. I just have to deal with it. Who knows? So, because I feel like having the bumps on my face was worse than what I was trying to get rid of to begin with, or to kind of cleanse my face to make it better. And weight has always been an issue for me. It's harder for me to lose weight, and I feel it has to do with this PCOS. You can tell me, what that entails, but that's been my experience. I've tried every diet known to man, and I have lost weight, but I've also gained it back and then some.
Okay.
Yeah, we talked a lot about weight, the weight part in episode 2. So for those that are listening to this for the first time, if you want to go back to that episode, we really talked about our experiences with dealing with our weight issues with this syndrome, for sure.
But you mentioned something, how your moods would change, and that's very much so associated with PCOS. PCOS and anxiety and depression and mood changes are very much so correlated. So, it affects your self-esteem if your hormones are kind of off, and it can't help but. You can't help but feel bad sometimes, and that's okay. Like you said, sometimes I get up, I feel bloated, I feel this way or that way, and you will feel that way, because sometimes people are like, no, I shouldn't feel this way, I shouldn't feel that, and then you're worse on yourself.
Yeah, right.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah,
you beat yourself up.
Yeah, for sure.
Because you're supposed to behave a certain way, especially women of color.
Right.
There's a stereotype or stereotypes about us, being the angry black woman. You don't want to necessarily be labeled that, or if you're in a professional setting.
We're super women.
Yeah, we're super.
We have to deal with everything. And if we are bothered, or if we are dealing with a sensitive issue that makes us emotional and vulnerable, we beat our own selves up to girl, why are you feeling this way? You shouldn't. And we'll even beat ourselves up.
You're not supposed to cry.
You're
in public.
Yeah,
right.
Oh, no, especially not at work. No.
And then obviously it's harder for us sometimes, so we don't have the time to cry. You got to just pick it up, put your clothes on, and go to work. You got bills to pay and things to do.
Figure it out as you go.
Yeah.
For sure.
So we don't have time, a lot to really think about or reflect or experience those feelings. And so when we suppress them, it turns into anxiety, manifests into depression.
So all those kind of feelings. What do you like, how does it impact your self-esteem? In what ways have it?
I know for me, especially with the facial hair, like just sticking with that topic, it was embarrassment, right?
Oh, okay.
And so that caused me to kind of draw into myself. And so I didn't want to go out. I didn't want to be social. I didn't want to talk to anyone really.
Right.
And then when someone did pay attention, it was like, oh, like maybe it is okay. And then I kind of overcompensated and went too far to the other end. And so it was, for me, it was hard to find balance.
Okay.
Right? Because it's, hey, I don't feel attractive. I don't think I'm worth the attention that I'm getting, but now I'm getting it. So, and I haven't had it, and I go beyond what I probably should, right? And so that's kind of been challenging for me.
Girl, that's a word. I think that's a lot of people's testimony right there, because it is so real. When okay, so there's already standards of beauty that are very Eurocentric. And you know, being an elder millennial, we're a little older than, you know, for Jessica and I being the elder millennial, we are in the age of Photoshop. So everything we've seen in terms of beauty is heavily edited. And so we're already internally fighting against this beauty standard and already feeling less than, because, you know, we don't fit those norms. And then to be suffering from something that you don't know you're suffering from, to have it manifest with something so visible like facial hair.
Yeah.
And then, you know, for me, it's like, you could tell it's not meant to be there because it's all curly and thick. Like, it, so now it's like ingrown. Now I got bumps, and it's just horrifying and discolored. And so then we start shaving to get rid of it.
Yeah.
But the shaving bruises your skin.
Yes, it does.
So now it's darker in those areas.
Hyperpigmentation everywhere.
Hyperpigmentation everywhere.
Really Yep.
You know, and so we're already fighting against the standard of beauty, and then to have this other thing affecting us so visibly, like what Jessica described. I also was very reclusive, very shy. I wouldn't even let a dude touch my hand, because it just was like, you know, why are you touching me? Everything was suspicious. And then when a guy did pursue me, I don't even know if you were talking about men. I just went there because that's my testimony.
Yes. Right. Yes, I was. Yeah.
When a guy did show me a little attention, it was like, and it would be the wrong person.
Right.
You, like you said, you do too much. Like, you know, oh, this isn't really meant to be. Like, this guy isn't right for me. But it's like, oh, but he's there.
Right.
So you end up wasting time, or you do being extra. You do too much. You invest too much time and energy in a relationship that isn't good for you, because you don't know who you are. You don't know, if you don't think you're beautiful.
There we go.
And that lack of self-esteem. So you end up in these weird situations. And it's crazy that something like facial hair could create that in a person, but it could be that one thing that just pushes you to that side, you know, of doing too much, of crossing that line.
Well, you know, the other side of that is to kind of think, you know, when you're feeling down about yourself, usually there's some kind of faulty thinking going on.
Yeah, you're right.
Right? There's usually something that we're telling ourselves that keeps us down. And that's important, because the real side of it is that, yes, the facial hairs and those kind of things, they're going to affect you. You know it's not supposed to be there. But at the same time, you got to take care of yourself.
Right.
So we got to watch a lot about how we're thinking and what we're saying to ourselves. And we got to correct it, because if not, it just keeps going.
It's true.
Right?
That's true. And that is very hard to do.
Very.
Initially. It gets easier, right? Like being in therapy for, I don't know, the last, we'll call it several months, right? Like where I was at the beginning and where I'm now is completely different, but you're constantly correcting yourself, constantly catching yourself. Like, no, like, don't be so hard on yourself, and trying to continue to reassure yourself. But it's terrible in the beginning.
Yeah.
When you're in the worst of it, when you know, and for me it was in terms of the self-esteem part, I do think I'm beautiful, you know, and I think that stuff does come from being around beautiful women that look like me, and like a great mother who I just thought, you know, that looked like her, and she's beautiful. Like, okay, I must be beautiful. So when you said the word faulty thinking, like, when did that creep in? And it did creep in slowly as my body changed. And you know, I'm not a size whatever, you know, double digits.
You're not seeing that in the magazines. You're not seeing that in the media. especially with social media.
True.
Guys weren't checking me like they were my friends. Oh, so when you start attaching the definition of beauty to how men view you,
Yes.
so if guys ain't checking it, that means you ugly. It's like, oh, that's the rational. It's so rational to think that way, and that's my friends were getting more attention. I just assumed that, it must be because I'm not as pretty as them. And then the hyperpigmentation, the horrible acne,
didn't help at all.
did not help in the facial hair, and the other things that the way our body changes. And
then these little things, before you know it, you're in that mood where you are, like you said, you are feeling depressed. You don't know where it manifested from, but it could just be different
triggers.
steps.
Slowly
Different
over
Those
triggers.
are triggers.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
okay.
Those are triggers. Someone turning you down. Those are triggers.
Okay.
And when because sometimes in the moment it's hard to catch it. So you have to be kind to yourself. You're gonna have some of these thoughts that come up, but take time. Take time to kind of examine what you're thinking so that you can make corrections.
Yeah.
So trying to be really conscious about those negative things that we're saying to ourselves and what else can we say. So you mentioned sometimes when it's hard, when you really can't decipher, like, is it me or is this correct? Sometimes reaching out to a professional to help you to kind of decipher what those feelings are and to figure out something else to replace it with. Like you were saying with your mom, sometimes you look at her and you're like, oh, she's beautiful, so I must be beautiful. You started changing that narrative that you've been saying to yourself all along, right? So if you keep it going, if something happens or the stubble shows up and all you're compiling is, oh, I'm this or I'm that or I'm not good enough or I don't deserve love or, I must not be lovable because he didn't,
And then you're the only one going through it.
You don't want to go.
Yeah, you feel like you're the only one going through it too.
I think that's where I was getting to. Like, my question really though was when you're at your worst. And when I think about my worst was when I was completely isolated. I thought I was going through it by myself. Like all this whole let's talk about PCOS on a podcast. This is like after years of healing. At the worst of it, isolated, depressed by yourself, antidepressant. Like, how do you get to a state? Like, how do you pull yourself out? And I think that's something I'd really like for us to talk about, because I know there are people out there who existed like that, or who are existing like that now. That you're not in a phase of to be able to be reflective, or to draw on, good examples, and even not even having healthy inner resources to pull from. You might have horrible resources, like maybe you like to drink your pain, maybe you like to smoke your pain, maybe you like to eat your pain, or self-medicate. And these, when you're at your worst, how do you come out of it, in a good way, to look at yourself as a whole person, redefining what beauty actually means, and redefining, your relationships with others in a healthy way. Like, how do you come to that point when you're in the worst of it?
Yeah.
Well, I think what you're doing right now is a good step. Starting the conversation and also continuing the conversation, bringing awareness. Also, I want to touch base on the fact that in our society, when I say our, mainly U.S., we do not regard mental health in a positive way. We, I think, should embrace the fact that we need to go see professionals for help. I go to church, I'm spiritual. You always hear pray, give it to Jesus. Give it to Jesus. Or, there's nothing wrong with prayer, don't get me wrong, but what I'm trying to say is we should also advocate for, having to at least embracing mental health and it being healthy in that sense, just as much as you would go to your primary care doctor to fix an ailment.
That's right.
So I think that too, spreading awareness with that, I think helps, because what do we typically do when we're going through stuff? We go to our friends or isolate ourselves, and we're not helping ourselves to get out of it because we really don't have the tools.
You said it. You have to do something to help yourself, because most times we do isolate, and that depression keeps us away from other people. So you do have to do something active. You got to make a commitment to yourself. I think that's like number one. that I'm not going to feel this way, and I'm going to take the steps to do it. You know, and like you said, the awareness, being okay and accepting that, getting help, or maybe I can't figure this out. Maybe I'm just too in it.
Right,
you know, I'm too deep right now. I'm feeling all of this. So other people can help you. So sometimes, yes, supportive friends can be really good, you know, to help you out of that. Sometimes you don't have that network. You know, seeing a counselor would be good.
Yeah, if you don't have those friends nearby.
And some of your friends might not even give you the right advice. Who knows? They're just going by what they know.
Yeah. And now
know,
they have so much more material online.
That's true. But then,
Whereas before, nothing.
Back in the day, yeah, you couldn't Google, like, I'm depressed. Like,
Right.
no, you couldn't do anything.
No.
My back.
Right.
Day.
You go into the
Before
library
the
to check out a
interwebs.
book.
Yeah.
Huh? Oh.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
This is before that. Oh.
Yeah. I'm talking about, we got email? Okay. How do I do that?
Right.
It took like 10 minutes for a page to load back then.
Sure
He wasn't
did.
trying to
Dial
search
up.
up nothing.
No.
One of my classes in college was state of the art. It was digital news media. And one of the requirements was to create an actual email address. The internet, when I grew up, that's why I didn't like it at first. It was so antiquated. And if you didn't type in the exact address, it wouldn't take you anywhere. It'd be like an error and I'm just like, this is not
it.
I don't like this. It's nothing like what it is today.
No.
And like you said, Jennifer, it takes time. So yeah, we had to rely on old school ways, like go to the actual library physically and you know, search the physical catalog.
Yeah.
I see you over there brewing. You have a thought or two.
I think the first step is realizing you need help, right? And that you can't do it by yourself, because I know your focus was on, like, in the United States, therapy has a stigma, but within the Black community,
Yes.
it's so much worse.
Yeah.
You know,
I
and
agree.
you go to your parents and go to church, pray it away, like you said, or I don't know what you're talking about, suck it up, like this is what I had to. And they go through this long diatribe about their life, and this is what I had to do. I had to walk to school in the snow barefoot.
Right.
And
You guys have
complaining.
it so good.
You're so
Back in
privileged.
my day.
and
You depressed over there?
Exactly.
You like,
Why?
okay, yeah.
And that just makes it 10 times harder to get up and do something. And I'm just grateful that I've had, like, people around me that are like, hey, like, maybe you should go talk to someone.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
this is more serious than you trying to figure it out by yourself.
Right, because you don't feel justified, you know, as far as feeling the way you feel, and that's not good. You want to, you know, you legitimately have an issue, and when people try to either deny it or brush it away, you feel insignificant. Like, well, what's wrong with me? What? No one else seems to be going through this.
Yeah.
Or they,
hiding
you know,
it.
minimize it.
They minimize it, make it seem like
Minimize
it's
it
minuscule,
like
it's nothing. Yeah.
This isn't something I would go get help for.
Right.
You
don't
know.
go for help for that.
Right.
Yeah.
But these are the things we, you know, I deal with every day with women, and I'm really glad to see more and more Black women coming for counseling.
That's good.
More and more. We've had, you know, other forums, Black, what was it? Black Therapists Rock, you know, different things
that's
like
true,
that
yeah.
now it's starting to open up,
That's
you know, and it's okay for us to get that
It's
kind of help.
okay, yeah. Especially Black women. It's okay. We are not super women.
Yeah.
And whoever's
That
stated
strong
that-
Black woman.
Yeah,
We got to
it's
get rid
hard
of
enough
that.
for that.
Yep.
It is.
If the first step is realizing that you need help, I think another part of that first step is also really humbling yourself.
Yes.
To knowing that you need it, because you might know you need it, but you still just hard-headed. And I'm speaking from personal experience again. I listen. Jessica's my best friend for a reason. So let me say this before I talk on that. When we say finding friends to help, not everyone is going to talk to you in the way that's helpful.
That's true.
Your family loves you, but they might not be able to touch you in that way to help you, or your other friends. So And when I talk to young people, especially in the classroom, you know, start editing your life like a film. Like there are some friends that are there for a purpose, and others that are not there for certain things, like if you're struggling.
Right.
So be very selective about who you trust in your inner circle, in your tribe, so that when you go to them for advice, you know that it's helpful advice, and because they might communicate with you on the same wavelength. For me, Jessica's on my wavelength. Oh, I don't want to start crying, but
That's all right.
it's the truth. Because even more recently, it probably was like last year, I was in another funk, and I was in the room bawling.
Yeah.
And all she did was call me like, hey, you know, how are you? And I'm just crying, like, you know, snot come out my nose. And all that girl told me to do was I said, I have to walk the dog, but I can't.
I remember this.
Put your clothes
I
on.
just can't.
Get shoes on. Go outside
What's going
and
on?
walk the
What's
dog.
wrong? And I'm telling her, like, I just feel, and I'm, you know, and she's like, okay, Jennifer, put your yoga pants on. Put your socks
That's
on.
right. Step by step.
Yeah.
That's all, you know.
That's it.
But there's been times Jessica has called me and she's given me advice, and I've been just stark nasty. Like, well, I hear what you're saying, but
Yes, because you are hard-headed.
You don't want to hear it.
And the reverse. And the reverse. There have been times when I've called her and she's, you know.
So y'all know each other.
Got me together and it's,
we're opposites, but we're the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But is there a sense of understanding between the two of you? Like, okay, she in
Yes.
her moment.
Yes.
Yes.
So
That helps.
and you
helps.
allow that. You allow
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. And so it goes back to my point of original point for all this long story was you have to be humble.
Yeah.
Because I've done that too, where I'm listening to advice, but I could have a million reasons to explain why I don't want to take it,
Right.
or I don't want to hear it, or I might even be just self-sabotaging, and that's another
That's a whole nother
layer
issue.
to it. Yeah,
Right.
because we're still trying to fight, you know, generational curses and habits and things. So a lot of times it's just self-inflicted stuff. So it takes a real self-aware mentality to say, all right, Jennifer, humble yourself, listen, because you trust this person. Or humble yourself and seek help because you don't have anybody. Your mama crazy, your friend crazy, you know, go and see a professional.
Yeah. But some people, they don't know the signs to get that
That's
help.
true. That's
You know,
true.
you don't know
How do you know
when.
when is when to get help? Like, how do you know? How do you?
Well, like I said, with sometimes it's the isolation can to. I think it's things that are more extreme. Like if it starts to become a habit where you're isolating from everyone. You know, for weeks.
That's a sign. Yeah,
that's a sign.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? You stop eating, or
your appetite totally changes.
all those things.
Your appearance changes.
Your appearance.
Yeah.
You start feeling shameful. You start feeling, you know, all of those feelings. You know, there's two robbers of you know, you feeling happy. One is shame, and one is comparison.
Ooh,
So, you know,
That was
shame
the
and
message.
comparison.
that is a word.
Right?
Yeah.
You know, when those two things start happening, you know you're in a zone that you probably need to start getting some help when that starts taking over.
Listen, ladies,
Yes.
think about every time you've ever felt your worst. I know as a Jamaican too, because we shame easy.
All right.
And you said it earlier. You said embarrassment.
Yep.
Wow,
Yeah,
it's either shame or and it will take you to
It will
that
take you.
spiral down.
Definitely.
Wow.
And that's something for us to recognize, I think, especially among Black women, because we almost live in shame sometimes. And there's a researcher, I don't know if you've heard of her, Brene Brown is her name. I was trying to say that. And she talks about shame, you know. So shame is one of those things that we tell ourselves, like, we're bad. We are, you know, guilt is one of those things that is kind of normal. We do something bad, then we're like, okay, I did something bad, I did something wrong, then I feel guilty about it. But shame is one of those dysfunctional kind of things, and it's like, you know, I am bad. That's what we tell ourselves.
Wow.
It's not that we did something, but when, you know,
not
you started
deserving
feeling
of anything
bad,
good.
you're not deserving, all those things.
That's deep.
And that's when you need to begin to reach out, you know, when it's starting to take over you.
Yeah.
I think that's huge. And I don't know who's listening to this now, but I think that's so huge to really understand if you're experiencing shame, and it's not that you did bad,
Right.
but when you begin to internalize it, that is a sign that you might need to talk to somebody.
That's right.
we're taking action step.
Definitely. Comparison is another thing. I don't know if you've felt that, with...
I have, but I'm ashamed to
Especially
admit it.
No, but it's true. We all do.
That's the first step, right?
We all do.
Oh my God,
Especially
yeah.
when
That's
what's
how
online.
Yes,
Well,
we all
and
feel it.
My mind, and so I'm ashamed to admit it, but I'll just, for transparency, because this conversation I think is going to help other people. Let's all just be honest. So, because we all have the same story.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I am ashamed to admit, in my last relationship, my ex cheated on me, and so total comparison to the person he cheated on me with.
Yep.
And I was trying to be all self-empowered by comparing, like, oh, I'm better and this. And that was all coming from a deficient place, of lack of self-esteem. Once you start doing that, being very petty about, she had a big forehead and greasy face. Like, oh, why he did that, and I'm smart and all this and that, but totally, that whole track that I went down to the comparison thing post breakup. That totally messed with my head in the wrong way. So I didn't want to acknowledge that first because I was ashamed. But let's all be honest.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right. No, I don't have PCOS, right? I don't have that, but these things that we're talking about, embarrassment and shame and comparison, I go through all of that, and I think that's where we can become unstuck when we start talking about
Exactly.
it. When we say, that embarrassed me, and then we can let it go. But
Let
when
it
you
go.
try to stuff it and like, I don't,
that's worse.
I shouldn't feel this way. Yeah.
And your mind has a way of just making things even just worse. If you let it, you sit there and just let your thoughts just wander.
Just go wild and it just snowballs.
Yes.
Or
That-
I shouldn't feel that way is what you said. I shouldn't feel that way.
Right.
Makes you suppress it or disregard that you're having it. And that's why me and my best friend watch a lot of Iyanla. I know it's TV psychology, but we watch a lot of it. And she always talks about speak your truth. But you have to speak it to release it.
You do.
Yeah. And instead of, a lot of times we disregard it by saying that, I shouldn't be feeling this way, especially with the religious aspect. Claudine, you introduced that earlier, because we were always taught in the church, there's no way you can be depressed if you love God. And it's then I shouldn't be feeling this way. So you try to disregard it.
All of them. A lot of them felt that way.
Oh, yeah.
Felt depressed and,
That's not biblical.
questioning it,
I don't know where we got that from.
That's definitely not biblical.
No.
Speak it and let it out. You know how to disregard it.
Yeah. But when we're talking about the shoulds, right? Psychologically, the term is automatic thought distortions. That means that you are thinking way to the right or way to the left. It's it's not rational. We're thinking irrationally.
Automatic thought
distortions.
That's deep.
Yeah. And so shoulds are one of them. I always say, stop shoulding on yourself. Stop doing that.
Okay.
Because the expectation is I should not feel the way I feel. And it's natural and normal for you to feel the way you feel. Let it be.
That's right.
And then deal with it.
Automatic thought
I
distortion.
love that.
And hopefully we'll get into an episode about relationships, because that's another thing I talk to my students about with emotional intelligence. When you're dealing with somebody else's feelings, they have every right to feel the way they feel.
Right.
You can't disregard and tell them why you feeling that way. You shouldn't, or you can't feel that way.
Yeah.
And in the Black community, we kind of teach that to ourselves, to each other. We correct each other. And so we end up doing it internally to ourselves with the shoulds or shouldn'ts.
That's right.
And we correct each other, outside of ourselves. So it's like double fold, But maybe we get into that some other time in another episode about relationships. But I made that connection to what you just said, and that makes total sense. Yeah, and we reinforce it with each other.
We do all the time.
Disregard the feeling.
All the time. And I think part of the healing, especially when we're talking about, PCOS and other things, is as small as it may seem, but acceptance is a huge part of your healing. Because when you can be able to accept some of the things that you're going through, some of the thoughts that you're having, it allows you to release a little bit more. The more, it's almost like energy, If you're going against it, there's more energy coming back at you. You remember those pendulums?
Yes.
Remember those little balls, and you pull one side and then let it go, and then all the energy go to the other side, and then it comes back even harder.
Yes.
That's what happens. And with acceptance, it allows you to just like be. It's okay.
And it's balanced out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, accepting. Yeah, I love that. You're accepting it, and then you're learning how to deal with it, and then you're moving on.
Right.
Instead of just denying that it even exists.
Exactly.
Wow.
That's when you stay stuck.
Yeah, I've been there. Deny. Because it's easy, right? To just push it away and think about something else, then go about your day, and then before you know it, it's been, you're sitting down, you're watching a commercial, and everything just comes up and out, right? And you don't know why. Like, why am I sitting here crying at a football commercial? Like, what's going on?
Time is best friends with denial.
Yeah.
Because you'll deny it in the moment and then procrastinate thinking about it again. And next thing you know, a year has passed and you've not dealt with it. You just procrastinated. And then randomly in the tissue commercial, you start crying. You're like, oh my God.
Where's this coming from?
Yeah. But time and denial, it's such a... And they're such good partners, and for those that like to do it, they just work well together. Let me deny it in the moment, and then you never know. Week passes, like
that's right.
Yeah, that's
months and years passes. So it's a very unhealthy
coping
mechanism.
Oh yeah. This is good because what everybody's saying is that there's an inner dialogue that constantly happens in our minds, but I don't think we take time to slow down and really look at what we're saying to ourselves. So,
who is your inner voice?
Yep.
What does she or he? Because sometimes you have your father is your inner voice. It depends on how you hear it.
That's true.
What does he? Or who is your inner voice? What are they saying to you? And listening when you hear it.
That's right.
Paying attention. And that's when you have matured through the process. Reflection is so amazing that when you do catch those moments, you got to write it down. Or, I tell students, you can also audio, like if you don't like to write, audio record your reflection. It's still journaling. It's just in an audio form. But you have to capture those reflective moments when you hear that voice. And so you can dissect it, and that leads to more self-awareness.
That's right. Like what are the actual, write it down. Like what are the words that I say to myself? What are the phrases that, that I use? Write them down.
Yeah.
What are the situations in which I just like start, feeling really bad? Like, when you're mentioning, when you mentioned about this guy maybe turning you down or something like that, that's a trigger. So to prepare for that the next time.
So when you write it down, you can start analyzing the patterns of the triggers.
Yes.
And it's more self-awareness.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That's that's part of the beginning stages, I think you said, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's good.
This has been a really great conversation. I just thank you so much for joining me on this. I'm excited about doing more talks like this, so that we can just keep sharing our stories. And some of the themes that kept popping up in our conversation that popped up for me was, to kind of conclude the conversation, was how important it is to live authentically as women. And who are you in your totality, in your authentic self, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And that comes with self-awareness. And once you really accept who you are fully, your triggers, the stuff you're good at, the things you're not that great at, the stuff you want to work on, your vision, all that stuff, you can really begin to tell and share your story. One of the things I talk about in my African American Humanities class is the difference between knowledge and enlightenment. Knowledge is just about learning, and sometimes we get really good at accumulating knowledge, but true enlightenment happens when you're ready to share what you've learned. And you can apply that with your life too. So as we become more self-aware, know more of ourselves, enlightenment happens when we're ready to transition into sharing. So we can share our stories, and that's when we know, we've really reached that pinnacle of enlightenment. And hopefully we can help other people through sharing our stories while we're helping ourselves. So thank you guys for joining me today. And for those that are listening, thank you for tuning in. And I hope that you join us in the next episode.